How do? How many times have y'all heard that? I always wonder where he's saying, how do? How do? I said, I'm good, Mr. Mac. How are you? We're here today to celebrate the life of our beloved Charles McIntosh. I hope each one of you has the ability to cherish the memories you have for him. I would like to thank the McIntosh family for giving me this opportunity to speak, to have the final word. If most of you knew Mr. McIntosh, you rarely got the final word. I would like to have a few scriptures, and if you know the 23rd Psalm, feel free to repeat it with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Keep going, I gotta turn the
For thou art with me.
Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. John 14:1-3. Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye be also. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. You know, death is permanent. We know not the time, the place, or the date. If anyone here has any trouble with their salvation, see me afterwards and I can show you the path. It's as simple as ABC. Accept, believe, and confess. Charles S. McIntosh, September 25th, 1925, January 24th, 22. I always wondered what the S stood for. You know, he would sign his name in the S. Charles Stables McIntosh. You know, I got thinking a lot about that. I said, you know, his family much knew what they were doing. Can't you hear him now? Hey, where's the little Charlie? Stables! Hey, Stables! You know, they knew that he'd be mucking out a lot of stables because in the old country, they kept a lot of cattle inside. But I always thought I would change it to Charles Stable. I dropped the S. And just looking at the definition of stable, trustworthy, reliable, constant, steadfast, virtuous, I don't know, unchanging, firm, durable, unwavering, and even-tempered. So I think that fits it. And I don't know what stables, do you know what stables meant in the family history?
It was our grandmother's maiden name.
Okay. I knew there was a reason for it. He was born 4th out of 10 children. And I found out that his wife Lily was also 4th out of 10 children.
Yeah. Jeez.
The clan McIntosh kind of parallels the Angus breed. Both of them, Angus from Angus in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, McIntosh clan from Aberdeenshire, Scotland, the Highlands. There's pictures and carvings dating back prehistoric time of black cattle being raised in the Highlands, and no doubt in my mind the McIntosh clan had the part to do that. Raising Angus cattle is in their DNA. The written history of the clan is quite extensive. I just looked it up briefly, and there's written records going back to the 1100s. And you know, how many of y'all watch Braveheart? Mel Gibson, William Wallace, Robert the Bruce. The McIntosh clan supported them to try to get the English out of Scotland. And it's the same blood and the same character and the same strength that runs through Charles McIntosh's veins, the McIntosh clan. And, you know, the Vikings, they didn't take over Scotland. The Romans didn't take over Scotland. Those Scottish Highland people were a tough breed of people. Mac talked to me some about his dad. He referred to him as the old man. He said the old man, he says, he was good with horses. He said folks would bring them horses from miles around just so that my dad could work with them. And he told about putting up shocks of hay and shocks of grain. I don't know, some of y'all may know what a shock is, but you take sheaves of grain. Some of y'all may know what sheaves were, I don't know, but you stack them in a little pile, kind of make a teepee, the grain facing up, and then they have to come in there with usually horses and cart and load those things up, and they took it to the threshing machine. And more than likely, they cut the hay by hand, using them cycles and sieves. So it's a lot of hard work. And he also told me, he says, you know, he says, one of my jobs was feeding turnips and beets to the cattle. He says, you had to chop them things up just right. If it didn't chop up just right, he says, the cattle, they would choke on. So the man grew up working from a very early life. He often would ride his bicycle or walk to other farms to work. Mr. Mack was working on a farm in Wales when he first met his soon-to-be bride, Lillian Cree. She was working in a manor house. Phyllis told me they met in a pub. You know, that doesn't surprise me. You know, Mr. Mack, he kind of liked his single malt scotch, and he had an eye for the lassies. And I want to tell you, the other night we were there, I saw a picture of your mom when she was younger. A very beautiful woman. I often wanted to ask her, what does a Scotsman wear under his kilt? But I never did ask your mom. But knowing Charles McIntosh, he went commando. There's no doubt in my mind, he's just that kind of guy. And I researched a little bit about the Kenneth Mont in Aberdeenshire. Today it has a population of 426, and it has a single malt distillery in the town. Remember I told you Mr. Mack, he liked his scotch? I'm going to tell you a story now about the last drink of scotch I had with Mr. McIntosh. They brought him home on Wednesday. I called my brother Mike. This is the Wednesday before his passed. I called my brother Mike. I said, hey, you want to come over and see Mr. McIntosh with me? He did. We met there. I held his hands. We talked with him. I said, hey, you know what would be good? Let's give a final toast to Mr. McIntosh. So Phyllis filled us up 3 scotch from Glenlivet. It's Glenlivet, I believe. 3 shots of scotch. Brought it over there. I said a few words. We took her scotch. Sandra took that little sponge, you know, that you wash with. She dipped it in his shot glass, put it in his lips, his mouth. He sucked it down. It must have took him about 3 times to get the full amount in. And I realize now, he was hearing us. He was hearing every word we said. And when I was there holding his hands, I was kind of looking at his hands and feeling them. Mr. Mack had big hands. You looked at his hand, you said, these are the hands of a man who worked 90 out of at least 90 years of his life. You know, his fingers were a little gnarled, his knuckles, his nails weren't right. I can remember seeing a lot of times he'd have bandages on his fingers, stuff. But the calluses were still visible. You know, Mr. Mack hadn't done a lot of work in the last year or so, but you could still tell the hands of a man that worked his entire life. Well, McIntosh married Lillian Cree in 1946. Do you remember how I told you the story of Angus kind of parallels Mr. McIntosh's life? The first Angus cattle were brought to the United States in 1873. Naturally from a Scotsman. He brought 4 bulls and brought them to Kansas. And Mr. Mack and Miss Lillian touched down in New Orleans in 1947. He told me he either had $37 or $47 and some change in his pocket. just think about the courage, the dreams they both must have had to leave their country, their family, their way of life to come to the United States. Mr. Mack was only 22 at the time. He was a man among men, a giant. He was a man of the times because he was a man for the times. And did I tell you also that Miss Lillian was pregnant? Yeah, 6 weeks later, she gave birth to Mary Ann in New Jersey. But here's another interesting little trick. The boat was supposed to land them in New York. For some reason, it's diverted to New Orleans.
Yep.
So he gets to New Orleans with a pregnant wife, $37 or $47 in his pocket. He had to catch the train, go all the way back up to New Jersey. I wonder what they were thinking. You know, the first time in the United States, having to deal with this. And I'm sure, Mary Ann, you were born a little bit early. It had to be a lot of stress on your mama.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right.
Mr. Mack took a job at H&L Farms in New Jersey. This was a purebred breeding operation for Angus cattle. He was there from 1947 to 1974. They left because the owner, Mr. Wittenberg, had died. Here's kind of another parallel. The Angus breed flourished in the United States. It's now the #1 breed in the country and in the UK. Well, Mr. McIntosh grew and flourished in the United States. His family expanded. Mary Ann was born in 47. You're not supposed to tell women ages, so y'all can do the math. You can figure it out. Phyllis in 53 and Jock in 55. Jock and I are about the same age. In the 60s, while at the farm, from 60 to 65, his kids always they probably showed cattle longer than that, but they told me from 60 to 65, they either had the champion or the reserve champion steer, I guess it was.
Yeah,
at that
yeah,
time.
seriously.
And in 65, they had both the reserve and the grand champion. Most of the cattle come off H&L Farms. And you know Mr. Mack had a hand in raising these cattle and breeding these cattle. He worked extensively with the 4-H in his younger years. I can imagine it be at one of his clinics. Well, you know, you got to hold the clippers like this. But I know he taught them well. The farm, when he's up there, they had numerous sales. They would take and alternate between, what was the other farm's name?
Coxon.
I can't remember. They have another farm, they'd alternate between the years having sales. And Wilkes, you put on a sale. David, you've helped with putting on sales. You know the amount of work it takes. And they told me they had some grand meals. Had to put up tents, bleachers, paint the fences. And you know, if Mr. McIntosh was involved with it, you know the place looked immaculate. While in New Jersey, the farm sent some bulls to the National Western Stock Show in Denver. That show was held every year in January. Well, we went by train. Mr. Mack and them had a boxcar fixed up so they could stay in there with the bulls. They had a loft built on top where they would sleep, and they kept their grain and feed up there. But he rode that train from New Jersey, maybe New York, I don't know where it left.
Upper New York.
From Upper New York in January to Denver. And of course they asked him, well, how'd you do? He says, all we want, he says, they paid us in silver dollars. And Phyllis told me when he brought the sack of money home, he says, in a croaker sack, says it was so heavy, she couldn't even pick it up. I can't imagine riding a train that distance. Probably didn't know it because I didn't know it either, but Mr. Mack only had an 8th grade education. In Scotland, they had what they call the free school. You went to 8th grade. And after that, you had to pay money to go. And having 10 children, you know, his family couldn't afford that. But Mr. Mack got his first degree while he was in New Jersey. He and Lil got their diploma. Square dancing. I'd have liked to see them square dancing. Hallelujah. Anyway. Something that you might not know, that he was a self-taught musician. he played the squeeze box. It was a lot like the accordion, but it had buttons you had to push.
Yeah, and it was small. Like a
And-
concertina. That's what it was.
What it was?
A concertina.
Okay. There you go. They told me that Mr. Mack could be out at night on the porch playing his squeeze box, and the lady, I guess it was the owners,
The owner's housekeeper.
would holler out and says, "Hey, y'all turn your TV down, we're trying to sleep." But having only 8th grade education, but I tell you, he had a self-taught PhD in animal husbandry and genetics. One of the smartest men when it comes to cattle I have ever known. I put Mr. Mack up against anybody. Well, they moved to Georgia in 1974 after Mr. Wittenberg passed to Galoga Farms, owned by Judy and Dr. Stitch. He was manager of Galoga Farms, and I first met Mr. Mack, Mrs. Mack, and Jock probably in June of '81 when I was first started working for Dr. Bryson. I was just starting my career, and Mr. Mack had been in his career a long time. You figure 81 is born 25. He was 56 years old when I first met the man. You know, he worked like a guy in his 20s. And my relationship with Mr. Mack lasted, you know, until he passed. But I can truly say I never saw a man who was not the owner take care of Galoga Farms like it was his own. I don't know how you hire a person like that. Y'all did very well. I don't know how he came to y'all's attention, how you brought him here, but you brought us a saint. You know, he would put in time, hours, Saturday, Sunday, holidays. I often thought that, you know, if I could have had Mr. McIntosh, my dad, probably your dad, some of y'all when you were younger, imagine we had them in their 20s and 30s, all working together. Just think what they could have accomplished. I've never seen anybody like that. Well, several things I remember about working cows with Mr. Mack. And I told him today, he had a pair of scissors that he trimmed the hair out of the ears. He says, you know, he says, Les, he says, my old veterinarian in New Jersey, he gave me these scissors.
Oh.
And he told me, he says, now, Charles, he says, you call me for a cow? He says, you have that cow ready when I get there. And, you know, I can truthfully say, when I got to the farm, the cattle were ready. He had them presented well. Working with the family was fun. I mean, his wife, Miss Lillian, went out there, Jock was out there, Mr. Mack, and usually someone else, Elizabeth helped a lot. He worked most of the cows in that old chicken house in the middle. He had a long lane going up there, and he built gates. He put one at the end, he put one behind so I get in and preg check. And I guarantee you, we worked cows through those chutes then about as faster than most of the places they work today. Now, there's a few places that can move them through, but it was pretty good. And Mr. McIntosh, he'd get out of line a little bit. I can still hear Mr. Lillian say, now, McIntosh! Calm him right down. We get back to work. And if you're lucky enough to be working and you went through lunch, Miss Lil would always leave and get us lunch fixed. And it was always a good meal. He says, you know, Les, he says, if a woman can cook, she's good in the bedroom. McIntosh! Oh, he'd got a roar back and it says, and he'd laugh. And he had such a good laugh. I had the pleasure of going to Moultrie with him, to the farm show. And we got there early that night before the show opened. We stopped, I guess it's Bruton Parker College that's down there. Anyway, we stay in dormitories and they would feed you. So me and Mac was in the same dorm room. About 2 o'clock in the morning, he flips the light on. He grabs his towel and his shower bag and he heads off. He comes back and I says, Mac, what are you doing? I says, 2 o'clock in the morning. He says, oh, 2 o'clock? He says, I thought it was 5 o'clock. If you went anywhere with Mr. Mac, you always got there on time.
Oh.
He would make sure you'd get there on time. Back I don't know, it hadn't been that far long ago. David could probably tell us. We would go to Perry to the commercial heifer sale put on by Mike Jones. You know, I never had fitted a cow, but they kind of want them clipped up a little bit. And Mr. Mack would come down and show me how to clip them up and prepare them and how to trim them. And when it came, you know, he had everything laid out. He had his clippers, he had his oil, he had his diesel fuel dipping, he had his comb. I mean, you could tell this man had done this for a lifetime. Well, we'd get to Perry down there, David, Mac and I. Sometimes Robert Newberry went with us a time or two. The man taught me more about having to take care of cattle, kind of in a sale type situation, than I'd ever known. I mean, sometimes he would get his cattle sometimes drinking Kool-Aid in water before they came down, because he says, you know, he says, if some cattle don't drink and they don't fill up, he says, you got to make sure they're drinking the water. He'd bring his shovels, his pitchfork, water hoses. I mean, he had everything he needed to take care of it. He'd put the hay against the back wall and he'd sprinkle feed on top of it. He said, you know, eat the feed, they'll eat the hay. And you got to have them looking full to look good for the sale. I tell you, when I was down there, you don't realize what kind of footprint he has around the state, around the country, internationally. Everybody come up and knew Mr. McIntosh. I mean, they could see him walking there and stop him and talk to him. And they talk about this and that, places in New York, in New Jersey. You know, and I'd just be tagging along, and oh yeah, he says, and this is my veterinarian. You know, he's been my veterinarian for 30 plus years. I was proud of that. I'm gonna tell you, I was proud of that. But when you went to Perry, Mr. McIntosh, you got up early, you went down and saw your cows before breakfast. You took care of those cows before breakfast. You came back and ate breakfast. Then you went back to the barn, and he was very good at marketing. You could just hear him talk to people coming up and looking. And you know, we'd stay there all day, and at night we'd come back. We had to have a steak. Certified Angus beef. I don't know, that doesn't surprise me. But then you'd go back before you went to bed, and you took care of them then. And Mr. Mack brought good cattle. They used to sell them the first pen of 3. They had a lot of cattle down there. They sold them in groups of 3, and they judged them. In the top 3 pens in that group, they got to sell first. Mr. Mack always was in the top pen of 3. David Rivel was in there. I slipped in once or twice, but learned so much about that with Mr. McIntosh. I can remember, he called me either Saturday or Sunday. He says, Leslie, he says, you got to get out here. He says, I got a cow that's got her tongue about cut off. So I rushed on that there. He had her in the chute, and I was looking, I said, Mac, I don't know what we're going to do. And I was thinking to myself, I'm going to have to cut it off. And he says, by Jesus, man, we're going to sew it back on.
Wow.
And we let her go out. We gave her some raw poon, and we dropped her down. And Mr. Mack and I, we sewed that back on.
Ooh.
Back in, I'll tell you another story. Back in the 90s, I'd gotten out of the dairy business, and it's either 90 or 91. We had a pretty severe drought in the area. And Slogan was looking for some places for some cows. I said, you can bring them down to the farm. It could have been his cows, I don't know if it was y'all's cows. But he brought about 35 or 40 head and put them in a 100-acre pasture. And they stayed there 2 or 3 months with the grass kind of caught up. Well, we're in there trying to help him get them caught up. We couldn't catch one heifer. He says, just a minute now. He says, I'll get her caught. Well, he went back to the farm, loaded the cow up in a trailer that was halter broke. He brought that cow down, started leading her around the field. The heifer got with her, they walked her right in the lot, and there she was. So, you know, he thought outside the box. I appreciate the knowledge that man had in dealing with Angus cattle. It hadn't been that long ago. I was asking Amber, it was probably in 2017. We was at the stockyard, probably semen tested some bulls. I don't know, he had brought 2 or 3. And one bull was a little ornery. You don't have much space between where the head is and getting around to the side. And I said, Mr. Mack, you got to be careful going in front of that bull. He'll get you. I done went 2 or 3 trips, and he almost got me. Well, I was standing behind. Mr. Mack went across in front of me. That bull hit him. I mean, it hit him so hard. It's the only time I ever seen the man's knees buckle. I caught him. You know, we set him down in a chair. Says, Mac, you all right? Mac, you all right? Oh, yeah, he says, I'm all right. The more I looked at him, I said, you know, we need to get him checked out. So we took him to the hospital, and they had a pretty nurse working with him, checking him out. The doctor said, he says, well, you'll be able to go home. He says, well, you know, if I spend the night, I've got to have me a sponge bath. And I said, no, I think you'll be able to go home. He says, well, if I spend the night, I've got to have that sponge. He was a rascal.
He was.
He was a rascal. You know, Mr. Mack was an innovative breeder. You know, EPDs weren't around. Most of y'all know what EPDs are? Expected progeny differences, and statistical analysis using genetics to go through and figure out all these traits. Well, it wasn't around for most of Mr. Mack's career, but he bred good working cattle. He didn't pick the high numbers. He worked cattle that would work. I saw a picture, I guess it must have been, who showed the Grand Champion steer?
Oh, I did. And we both did. We both did. We all did.
I saw a picture of a calf that y'all were showing. It could have been in the 60s.
Yeah.
And it was short, thick, probably only weighed 750 pounds. Now, you know, to get in these shows today, you can have a minimum weight of 750 pounds. Now, 1,400 pounds is probably the norm. But Mr. Mack played a role in growing the Angus cattle to what they are today. He was a leader in the Angus industry. He placed cattle in every state except Alaska and 4 international countries. He was a charter member of the Wilkes County Cattlemen's Association, the Oglethorpe County Cattlemen's Association, the Georgia Angus Association, and the American Angus Association. He was Purebred Breeder of the Year while at Caloga, and he was inducted to the Angus Hall of Fame in Athens. I got invited to that meeting in Athens. I went there. And Mr. Mack, when he goes somewhere, he dresses up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He had his tweed jacket on. He had a bolo tie, I think, with an Angus cow on it. Probably khakis like I had. That's what he used to like to wear. And he had a table displayed showing all the things at Caloga Farm that he'd been involved with. It was good to see. He was ready. He was prepared. And that's a pretty high honor to be inducted to the Georgia Angus Hall of Fame. So, salute you, Mr. Mack. He participated in numerous field day shows and sales. If there was something going on related to the Angus breed, Mr. Mack was there. Like I said, he's one of the hardest working men I've ever known. I love Mr. Mack. The community loved Mr. Mack. Like I told you, he reminded me a lot of my dad. You know, Mr. Mack, he liked to play cards. He liked to bowl. He liked to watch the Braves. He got to see the Braves win the World Series. And in the end, you know, Mr. Mack, he won his battles too. It was kind of hard watching him get older. You know, a little stooped over. He was getting a little dementia. But he had a saying, you know, he said it a couple times. He says, you know, it takes an old horse for a hard road. Now think about that now. You know, that kind of explains him to a T. Maybe to the other people we knew. But you know, when time gets difficult and tough, you want the experience there behind you. I stopped by and saw him one night. He'd fallen in the bathtub taking a shower, I guess. He was laying in his bed back in there, and the amount of bruising on his shoulder and his back, you know, I couldn't believe it. But like he says, it takes an old horse for a hard road. You know, Mr. Mack, I made this same analogy at my dad's funeral. You throw the stone in the pond, ripples go out. They touch every corner. Mr. Mack had a pretty big sized stone thrown in that pond, and his pond was pretty big. Just think of how many people in his life he has touched. You know, from Scotland to Wales to New Jersey to Georgia, all the shows and sales, Denver, you know. I just can't imagine. 2 Timothy 4-7. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. There was one other thing, you know, I want to read, and I think this kind of says it all and sums it up by Mr. McIntosh. Y'all may have heard it before. It was by Paul Harvey. Let me read it to you. And on the 8th day, God looked down his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made Charles Stables McIntosh. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, milk cows, work all day in the fields, milk cows again, eat supper, then go to town and stay past midnight at a meeting of some sorts. So God made Charles McIntosh. I need somebody with strong arms, strong enough to rustle a calf, and yet gentle enough to deliver his own grandchild. Somebody to call hogs, tame cantankerous machinery, come home hungry, have to wait lunch until his wife's done feeding visiting ladies, to tell the ladies to be sure and come back real soon and need it. So God made Mr. McIntosh. God said, I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn coat. McIntosh would probably be a newborn calf. And watch it die, then dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need someone who could shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of haywire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps, who, at planting time and harvest season, will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon, and then painting from tractor back, put in another 72 hours. So God made Mr. Mack. God had to have somebody willing to ride the ruts at double speed to get the hay in ahead of the rain clouds, and yet stop in midfield and race to help when he sees first smoke coming from his neighbor's place. So God made old Tosh. God said, I need someone strong enough to clear trees and heave bales, yet gentle enough to tame lambs and wean pigs and tend to the pink cone pullets, who will stop his mower for an hour to splint the broken leg of a meadowlark. It had to be somebody who plowed deep and straight and not cut corners. Somebody to seed, to weed, to feed, to breed, to rake and to disc and plow and plant and tie the fleece and strain the milk, replenish the self-feeder, and finish a hard week's work with a 5-mile drive to church. Somebody who would bail a family together with soft, strong bonds of sharing, who would laugh and then sigh and then reply with smiling eyes when his son says that he wants to spend his life doing what his dad does. So God made Charles Stables McIntosh.
Amen.
It was a pleasure putting some of this together. So many things I've left out, but you that knew him, you know, you have stories yourself to tell. And I would like anybody that wants to say anything about Mr. Mack, they would come up and say a few words, because I know you got the memories, the same kind of memories I got, maybe a little different, but so feel free if you want to say something, come up and speak.